This is how a simple bike ride turned into a curious hunt for some historical locations. It's no secret that most of my adventure rides are improv. I pick a spot on the map that looks like it might be interesting and then see what happens. And as if it was a clue on a treasure map, this particular adventure piqued my curiosity, so I did a little more research. After sifting through some historical records, location name changes, and Wikipedia typos, we were left at almost a dead end. So today, I'll be taking you through some beautiful countryside down some dusty gravel roads in hopes that we're not too late to find what we're looking for. Today's goal was pretty simple: range test the Himiway Cruiser in a mix of different riding conditions that would complement the design of this bike. And to make it more interesting, I decided to visit a local historical monument, which is a single-room schoolhouse built sometime around 1915. Adding to this location's interest is a cemetery only a mile and a half away. My hopes were that I would find some name relations between these two locations. Knowing that old buildings like this suffer heavily from vandalism and the fact that several severe hurricanes have hit this area over the past couple of years, I wasn't sure what to expect. But with both of these locations being out of the way, buried so deep in the woods, I was pretty hopeful that the conditions would be nice. Because this location was listed on Google Maps, the trip was pretty straightforward. 15 miles out, 15 back for a 30-mile round trip to explore the location and enjoy the trip. However, after gathering some information to do the video about this location, it turns out there's a second single-room schoolhouse that's not listed on the maps. Documentation about the second schoolhouse does give us an approximate location. I was able to track it down and we took one of the gas bikes out to explore it. That video will be up in a couple of days. So for now we'll be exploring the Brister School House with its nearby James Cemetery. As a bit of a jack of all trades, I'm certainly no historian. I'll leave some links in the description in case you would like more details about the Brister Schoolhouse, but I'll just be covering some of the basics. But first, we need to get there, so let's give a little bit of an update on the Himiway Cruiser and how it's been doing so far. I find myself riding the Himiway Cruiser more than any other e-bike I own simply because this bike fits me really well. It's a large bike, and I'm a big guy, 210 pounds, 6'4", and I just feel comfortable on this bike. And because this also kind of matches my jack-of-all-trades personality, this bike does everything pretty good, but it doesn't really specialize in any particular riding style. Basically, I just put this bike in the category of a casual adventure bike. Today's range test proves that it has more than enough battery capacity for 90% of my riding, so I'm happy with that. And so far, it's proven to be a reliable bike. Same as when I pulled it out of the box, everything feels the same. I don't go out of my way to abuse it, you guys know that, but it's been through some pretty rough stuff. Knowing that most companies pad the numbers when it comes to range, and long range is subjective, I personally consider anything over 20 miles to be a long-range trip, but for some people it's not long range unless you're pushing 100, so that's up to you. For today I planned 30 miles, and then when I would see how the battery was doing and how I felt, I would consider pushing it further. For the first half of our trip, 15 miles, I kept it at a 14 mile an hour pedal assist. And once we got to where we were going, we had most of our battery left. This uses high-quality cells, Samsung or LG, and they really hold up quite well. I can say with pretty high confidence that if you're keeping it about 14 mile an hour pedal assist, you're going to get close to their range estimations. For the return trip, I decided to kick it into the highest level of pedal assist and at times use throttle only, between 18 and 25 miles an hour depending on riding conditions. I didn't just do this because it had so much battery left. At about 20 miles, my butt was burning. This is not a bad seat. It's actually pretty practical for mid-range trips, but with a lack of cushion and no springs, it doesn't hold up well to this bike's range capabilities.
No, not all the way. There's an old schoolhouse down one of these back roads up here about a couple miles. An old schoolhouse. Close. Yep. Hey, give me one. Yeah.
So that'll do it for the update. Now back to the Brister School House and some information that you guys might find interesting. From what I've gathered, this schoolhouse was placed on the National Registry of Historic Places and Monuments in late June of 2001. Which is good news because I believe when you're on this registry, you're given an allowance to help with maintenance and upkeep so the building doesn't fall apart over time, or the damage is kept to a minimum. Local organizations, fundraisers, and even families that have lived in the area for a long time will do their part to help keep these buildings alive, but as those generations pass over time, there'll be no interest in keeping these buildings up to date, which is why being a historical monument is such good news for these small buildings out in the middle of nowhere, whereas generally nobody would really care about them and they would just disappear into history. I think the same is true via a different organization with a lot of the cemeteries we visit, because even ones in the middle of the woods, which otherwise would be unheard of, still have somebody there to keep the overgrowth to a minimum. The Brister Schoolhouse stands at the intersection of two dirt roads in a forested, isolated rural section of eastern Wynn Parish. The small one-room school shows the influence of the craftsman style and looks much as it did when it was built. Records indicate that an additional room was added in about 1920 when the Brister School District was established. This was to help accommodate with different age levels and grades, as it wasn't uncommon for these single-room schoolhouses to have children in many different levels. But in 1940, the addition was removed for what appears to be unknown reasons. The schoolhouse is still occasionally used for reunions for some of the surviving students. And unfortunately, the windows are boarded up so we can't get a look inside. This is done to help prevent vandalism, but in part 2, where we explore the Phillips Schoolhouse, the window boarding is removed, fortunately at the time we visited, so we were able to get some good pictures and an idea of what's inside. Description of the building says we weren't really missing out on much, as it's just a large room with a small coat room near the entrance. At some point, power was added to the building, though disconnected at this time, and I can't be certain when this was added or if the school was in operation during periods where it had electrical power. But out back, we were able to find what appears to be a well. I couldn't imagine this would be anything else, although you certainly wouldn't want to drink out of it today. With the documentation stating that this building looks about the same as when it was built, minus some average wear and tear that you would expect to see on a building over 100 years, remember, this is in the middle of nowhere. Attitudes towards public education in the mid-19th century Louisiana were very different from those held by today's educators and parents. At that time, the prevailing opinion was that education should be the responsibility of the family rather than the state or local government. As a result, parents who could afford the expense sent their children to private schools, and the idea of public school was often equated with pauper education. Although attitudes began to change in the late 19th century, opportunities for public education remained limited. The state's 1845 Constitution had mandated the creation of public school systems in each parish, but the public-private partnership which developed thereafter seldom worked properly. Though locals met their obligations by providing churches, lodge halls, and other types of buildings for educational use, cost-conscious pro-Reconstitution legislators often failed to honor the state's part of the bargain. Thus, for the most part, the responsibility for educating their children still remained in the hands of concerned parents. The one-room Brister Schoolhouse was one of these semi-public, semi-private education partnerships. Constructed on land donated for the school by the Brister family sometime before 1898, the candidate was created in approximately 1915 to replace a predecessor destroyed by fire. Despite the age and condition of this building, it doesn't have all that much history, as it only operated until 1940s, the same year the addition was removed, simply because larger buildings were being constructed for public education and students were being consolidated into these locations. The Brister School House, and later Phillips that we'll visit in the next episode, hold some significance, at least for me, because as far as I can tell in Louisiana, these are two of only 4 remaining single-room schoolhouses that haven't been lost to history. What has me most curious about the Brister Schoolhouse is its location. It doesn't appear to be near anything. It's about as far out of the way as you can get. Possible it's a middle ground for a lot of small towns that may have existed 100 years ago, but as far as I can tell, there was nothing of significance out here. With budgets being tight and the land being donated, that might have a lot to do with why it was in this exact location, but other than that, I got nothing. Old pictures, videos, and fuzzy memories can give you kind of a black and white hue on history. Interesting thought though, with this school being so far out of the way, the road conditions and environment around the school have likely not changed much, if at all, since students went to school 100 years ago. So we're likely seeing the same view that an average student would have seen on their way to school each day. In short, high-resolution eyeballs always existed. The camera technology is what's changed. Before heading home, I stopped at the James Cemetery 1.5 miles further down the road. I was able to find dates as old as 1820 for birth in this location, and even some newer tombstones from the early 2000s to show that this gravesite is still in use. It was a bumpy ride to get there, but I was in luck because just as I was heading down the road, a grader was passing me by to smooth things out. Just outside the cemetery, I pulled out a small camp soda and boiled up some ramen noodles. I mostly just did this because I purchased it recently and wanted to test it for a camping trip that'll be coming up pretty soon. Out of all the cemeteries I've visited so far, the James Cemetery is my favorite. I'm not sure why. It might have a lot to do with its location so deep in the woods and out of the way, but there was just the right amount of overgrowth shading some of these graves while still being well kept. Although I wouldn't want to spend a night anywhere near the cemetery due to its location, I had a very peaceful feeling walking through it, reading some of the names and dates. I know the subconscious will make visiting any location out in the middle of nowhere feel more peaceful. This one just felt like it wanted a visitor, so I was glad I could be there. Everyone values information differently. It is most likely that this trip has more significance to me than it does to you. But there's more to this video than just history about a building or information about a bike. It's the fact that my curiosity and entertainment was piqued due to the simple fact that I decided to ride a bike today. And whether it's human-powered, gas, or electric, there's nothing stopping you from doing the same and finding some hidden gems. So I thank you for joining me on this adventure. I hope you guys got some useful information, or at the very least, were mildly entertained. And until next time, ride safe.